From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Our connection this hour was made this past weekend when South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham died at the age of 71. His doctors say that he suffered an aortic dissection, a catastrophic health event that affects roughly 13,000 Americans every year. The average American adult is 38 years old. The average member of Congress is 20 years older. The average member of the U.S. Senate is a record 65 years old and climbing. Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley will turn 93 in a couple of months. Bernie Sanders is turning 85. It's always perilous to assume we know what the founders of the country might say about something. Things were quite different in their time. But if you've seen those paintings of the founders debating in the early days and they're wearing powdered wigs, it's always surprising to find that the average age in that room was around 40. Senator John Ossoff of Georgia is 39. He is the youngest of 100 senators today. Last night, Jon Stewart of The Daily Show weighed in on the passing of Lindsey Graham and the health questions surrounding Senator Mitch McConnell, who is 84 years old. Let's listen.
And not to put too fine a point on it, but the last person to speak to Graham is our 80-year-old president. The governor who chooses Graham's replacement is 79. One of the candidates being considered is 78, but he backed out because he's too important at his current job in the House of Representatives, all to save the Todd Blanche hearings, which are being co-run by 92-year-old Chuck Grassley and whippersnapper Dick Durbin, 81. The entire Congress is falling apart due to a lack of not just political will, but bone density.
All right, so maybe you think that entire conversation is ageist and unfair. Maybe you think there should be age limits for certain offices. Maybe you think, look, this is just up to the voters and we get what we get. We'd love to hear from you this hour on the subject of congressional age and its impact. And our guests include in studio someone who has been elected to office. That's Mark Johns, Monroe County Legislator for District 8. He's a former state assembly member. And Mark, it's nice to see you in studio.
Great to be here, Evan.
And next to Mark is Patrick Coyle, Chief of Staff of the Rochester-Genesee Valley Area Labor Federation. The last time we talked about this was 7 years ago, and you were here, so you're 7 years older.
My hair was still brown the last time.
I don't think it actually was.
I would say majority brown. It's less, yeah, just give me the credit, Evan. Come on.
And you're 34?
I'm 34. Yeah, I'll be 35 this year.
Well, you got more hair than me, but it's actually more gray than mine.
Evan, the shoes I'm wearing are 34 years old.
Mark, you know what you're signing up for.
I knew what I was signing up for.
You do. Now, so Mark Johns, you hear that clip from The Daily Show. Is it unfair to focus on age like that?
I think it is. There's a lot of people that die at a young age, and you're going to hold it against them that they had cancer or some debilitating disease. Doesn't mean that their brain isn't functioning.
Okay. Patrick, was that clip unfair?
I don't necessarily think it was unfair. I certainly think, there was hyperbolic language, but, I think it speaks to one of the larger problems that, exists in our political system right now, right? Which is, I think a lot of our current problems can be traced back to the fact that people feel like their elected representatives do not understand them and their problems. And, I think like a big part of that is the feeling that like their elected officials are so much older, than their average constituent.
And so let me ask both of you. Well, first of all, I should ask Mark, do you agree with Patrick's assessment that the age gap between the average American and their elected leaders makes it more likely, it's not impossible to stay in touch, but more likely that elected leaders become out of touch? Do you agree with that?
Not exactly. I think that Bernie Sanders is 80-something, and he appeals to a younger crowd. So I think it's really where your mindset is that counts. People, look at Evan, here's the quote of the day. What do people 65 and 35 have in common? The answer is they've both been 35. But only one of them has been 65. And that extra 30 years of experience and being able to learn, I think makes you a better legislator.
So wisdom with age.
Of course.
Yeah.
If it comes, I mean, I'm not saying that, we have a bunch of geniuses down in Albany or Washington. I used to joke when I was in Albany. I said, let's give the assembly an IQ test and have the Senate score it, And there is no qualification on age. There's no qualification on IQ or education either.
So, Patrick, that 65 versus 35 difference, Mark sees it, generally speaking, as a chance to bring more accumulated wisdom to office.
Yeah, and again, I think you made a really good point, right? That it's not one size fits all. There are a lot of representatives who are very old, who, I think are still doing a great job of staying in touch with, their constituents and with the issues that they're asked to legislate on. But, there is a point more generally about, the worlds that they came up in. So the average member of Congress right now was born in 64, 65, give or take. And I looked it up this morning, so I was curious about it. The cost of college annually when those guys are going to college is still under $1,000 for public schools every year. For private schools, it was only about $4,000. And how are we supposed to ask those guys to understand what it's like to, struggle with a student loan payment, to not be able to afford a house, just like the world has changed so much from the time from the world that they grew up in. I think it's fair to question whether, they will be able to most effectively diagnose and solve the problems that face many of their constituents.
All right, Mark, fair or unfair?
Well, he brings up a good point, but let's be realistic. How do electing people in their 20s and 30s, which is the definition of career politician, they become rich, they become multimillionaires, mega millionaires. How is that helping the average 20, 30-something-year-old? I mean, just because they get rich and famous, how is that helping you? We all know that college loans and experience and all kinds of college debt is a detriment to buying your first house. So, I know that as an older guy, but the reality is, until we get a campaign finance system, and I know all this stuff to me fits together. We need term limits, obviously. We shouldn't be voting for people who don't take a term limits pledge. There's plenty of other offices to run for, but it used to be term limits was 12 in a row, you got to go. Now Term Limits USA says it's 6 years everywhere except for the U.S. Senate, which would be 2 6-year terms.
What term limit in general do you want to see?
Well, I was good with the 12 in a row, you got to go. But
12 years of service.
Yes. Well, in any one position. I mean, if you were, obviously I never made the 12 years, but if you're in the Assembly, you can run for the Senate. If you're in the Senate, you can run for the Assembly. You can run for governor. You can run for Congress, county ledge, county executive. You wouldn't go to a casino if you didn't shuffle the deck, right? And God term limits us all, as we found out with, Senator Graham there. So, when your time is coming up, it's coming up. And whether it's politically or it's the end of life, there's going to be a certain amount of time. And then, look, at the big push now with some people is term limits on Supreme Court judges.
Yeah, so let me hit a couple of those points with you, Mark, and then I'll get Patrick's response on this here. I take the point that you say God term limits us all, and you don't know when your time is coming, and certainly best wishes for the family and people connected to Senator Graham. That was a shock, but you also bring up the Supreme Court, and your Democratic friends probably feel differently about the legacy of Ruth Bader Ginsburg because of decisions. Well, Patrick might make a different view of this, but I'm just going to say there's plenty of Democrats who've emailed me over the years to say their views of RBG changed because she made a decision to stay in office, stay on the bench, stay on the bench, stay on the bench. And I guess I feel like when you talk about term limits, but you also say the age of representatives is not a problem. Term limits would effectively make things younger. You wouldn't have the option to die in office for the most part.
Right. Well, as far as Ruth Bader Ginsburg goes, they wanted her to leave so Biden could appoint someone who would be a more left-leaning.
I think it was not Biden. I think it was Obama, but yeah.
Obama, excuse me. Pardon me. But the point is that idea of term limits on Supreme Court judges was back in the 90s, and it was pushed by a right-wing guy named Pat Buchanan. And the Democrats didn't want to go along with it then. Now the Republicans don't want to go along with it.
But at the start of the show, you talked about the accumulation of wisdom that comes with age. Why then do we need term limits? If that accumulation of wisdom helps you be a better legislator, a better jurist, why do we need term limits?
Because I feel if you go out and have, work a so-called real job, a career, and then you take the knowledge that you've gotten from life experience, including work, and then run for office, there's a big difference at 28 or 38 getting elected than at 58 or 68. And if you're going to be term limited, the rich lobbyists want young, rich career politicians to stay in office. They don't want somebody coming in like Mark Johns, rocking the boat and talking about what they get paid and their pensions and everything else. I just got through with a primary. Obviously, I didn't win, but I talked about some things that you never hear any politicians talking about. What they get paid, how rich they become, multi-million-dollar pensions, tax-free per diems. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that you will never hear any career politician talking about. It's like the magician's code of honor. You don't tell people how the trick is being played, right? I'm pulling back the curtains, and believe me, people in my own party are not happy with it.
All right, so Patrick, two things here. First, just briefly, on Ruth Bader Ginsburg, do you have a different view on that?
You're trying to get me beat up by the callers, Evan. You're trying.
I'm not trying. I'm just asking you.
No, I think given how the situation played out, I think it is fair to have what happened with her seat and the Supreme Court since then affect how you view her legacy, despite her many trailblazing achievements.
Okay, now in general, what do you make of the notion of term limits, and is that a solution here?
I don't think that term limits are a great option, right? Like, I think ultimately, we have term limits in their voters, and many of the states that have passed term limits, right? I think Michigan has an 8-year term limit for state legislators. And, to Mark's point about rich lobbyists, when you make it so you can only serve in state government for 8 years, ultimately all you're doing is creating rich lobbyists, because people will do their 8 years and then realize they're, 45 and
become a lobbyist?
Yeah.
Mark is suggesting they might go back to the private sector. They might, in his words, get a real job. No, why is everyone going to become a lobbyist? Because that's what they know. That's what they know,
right? And there is always going to be a market for not a market's probably not the right phrase, but these institutions needs to have centers of knowledge. They need to have people like, hey, here's how a committee meeting works. Here's how a bill gets passed. Here's how legislation gets proposed. Here's the people who know the most about this issue. And ultimately, term limits, especially like the shorter they are, all you're doing is moving those centers of institutional knowledge to a position that is not democratically accountable. It moves from electeds to staff to lobbyists, to other interested parties who are not directly accountable to the voters in a way that I do not think is good for small d democracy.
Okay, so let me take a little bit of feedback here, and no one's yelling at Patrick yet here, nor Mark. But listeners, if you want to yell at Patrick or Mark, they're ready for that. It's 844-295-TALK. It's toll free.
They can yell at Evan, too.
Of course. 844-295-8255. 263-WXXI if you call from Rochester. 263-9994. You can join the chat on the YouTube channel for WXXI News if you're watching there. And you can email, as always, connections@WXXI.org. Alex emails to say, I think too many elders jump to the idea, understandably, that voters and citizens are just being anti-old. Tons of talking heads stroked their chins in November 2024 about how both parties have struggled to develop younger talent, especially among the Dem camps. I think the issue is more the concentration of power among an increasingly small part of the population whose perspectives just don't match those of their constituents. The argument for age is experience and connections. Jen Lunsford, who was on the show yesterday, is a contradiction to that idea. I'm not going to guess her age, but she's fairly well established in the Assembly majority leadership. Joe Morelli, for all his faults, is relatively young, not hard to develop younger voices. I think Congressman Morelli I think he's in his 60s. I don't know. Yeah, can you fact check me on the congressman's age? But Alex says people don't necessarily see themselves in politicians who are old enough to have lived through desegregation and a political axis that still featured the Soviet Union. Patrick, and Congressman Morelli is 69. Go ahead, Patrick. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's the perfect way to look at it, right? It is not necessarily, the age, but more, the idea that your elected officials are out of touch and not listening to you in a way that like a younger, candidate might not be. And I think something that's really interesting to look at through the lens of this conversation is the most recent congressional primaries in New York. I was so struck by some of the candidates that won, in particular the Valdez-Reynoso race, because like Reynoso is not a particularly old guy, but he kind of lost his career waiting his turn, in that like he just like waited until they were like, hey, it's your time. And the moment totally passed him by, and like if you look at like some of like the more left-leaning candidates that won, they're all many of them are under 35. I believe the woman who beat Adriano Espaillat is 32. And I don't know Claire Valdez's age off the top of my head, but I think there is a really interesting conversation there, kind of about the party's role in kind of making sure there was a process for waiting your turn and not challenging incumbents in a way that allowed a generation of ambitious politicians to just watch their careers die on the rocks.
Well, that's an interesting idea, Mark. And Mark Johns is someone who's been in the Assembly. He's on the Monroe County Legislature. Patrick is talking about this idea that if you just wait your turn will come. Don't primary, don't challenge somebody, don't step out of line, and then your shot will come. And he's saying if it doesn't come, if the incumbent stays, and then all of a sudden, you're not that old, but you're still considered past. And I wonder if you think that does happen.
It probably does, but I'm not in favor of it. I'm for challenging people. The rich lobbyists want rich career politicians that are bought and paid for to stay bought and paid for. Remember, they say we need a new generation of career politicians. That's what they said 50 years ago when Chuck Schumer was running, Bernie Sanders and all them. So all these 20 and 30-something career politicians, 30, 40, 50 years from now are still going to be there like the crop we got in. We need real campaign finance reform, not this mixed blend of what they have in New York State, but either you take public financing or you take special interest money. Let's have a level playing field. Let's get rid of gerrymandered districts. Let's go out there and have a contest based on ideas.
But Patrick is saying that if there are term limits, you're going to see a lot more lobbyists, a lot more career. Do you agree with that?
No, because I'll be honest with you, I could have become a lobbyist, right? I mean, I'm credentialed to be on the assembly floor. I spent some time down in Albany. I could have hooked up with one of the big lobbying firms. I didn't do it. And I don't think most people do. But you don't go into Wegmans and give them $100 and walk out with nothing. You don't give hundreds of thousands of dollars to campaigns and expect to get nothing in return. And that's the problem. I don't care how old or young you are. When your goal is to get reelected and reelected and reelected, you start going to the big money, and the big money expects something in return.
Connected to this point that Patrick made was a conversation I had in March with Nate Salzman, who is on course to be the next supervisor in the town of Brighton. He was a 33-year-old town council member who decided that he was going to he was willing to primary, and he wanted to challenge the 70-year-old incumbent supervisor, Bill Maley, from his own party. And when Nate Salzman was on this program, we talked about the idea of willing to risk some backlash from a quote-unquote establishment if you run a primary campaign, and what it is like to be viewed as the young person challenging an incumbent who's been there for a long time. And I want to listen to some of what Nate Salzman said about that.
I think that our party needs to try new things. And, I think that our argument, and when I came on your show to talk about the abundance agenda, I'd argue that if our party's best case to the voters is we need to return to what we had before, we're going to continue to lose to the party of Donald Trump. And we have to argue for a government that works better for people, that really takes on the affordability crisis, that tries new things, that has new ideas, that welcomes new people to the party. And I'll tell you this, a lot, I talked about those 70 volunteers who signed up the week I announced I was running for office. My work now is trying to get those 70 people involved in the Democratic Party. And folks have come up to me and they said, well, I've never volunteered for a campaign before. And I said, perfect, you should go volunteer for other campaigns, because people need to hear new perspectives and new ideas. And so I hope that our national leaders are listening to that as well.
So I want to be clear in talking to Nate Salzman, who, by the way, he's going to be on the show tomorrow on a totally different topic. He was not denigrating the supervisor. He wasn't saying, I'm running because I'm tired of old ideas. But he was saying that there is a value to bringing in new voices over time. And he wanted to be one of those new voices. I think he walked a fine line there, but I don't think he was criticizing the supervisor. I think he's just talking about how in any situation, whether it's a company with a board, a company with leadership, an organization, a team, a coaching staff, government, new ideas matter and new perspectives matter. And over time, if the incumbents stay, you don't get that. I wonder what you heard there, first of all.
Yeah, I mean, I have tremendous respect for Nate. We've worked together on a bunch of stuff, and he's brilliant. I think he's going to be a great town supervisor. And yes, like I think that is the attitude that we should have. I think I think many times the argument was that the Democratic establishment was making here is like, you have to vote for us because we're the ones that can win elections and beat Donald Trump. And I think after 2016 and 2024, that argument struggles to hold water, and so it is just a matter of like these, gatekeepers and like the kind of like people are like, no, like wait your turn. This is how it's done. Like I just think there's less of an appetite amongst the base voters for them to be like, oh, we should just continue to do things the way that we've always done it.
Do you think the idea of running a primary against a longtime incumbent is out of line?
Of course I do not. This is not a view that is widely shared. But no, I think democracy is good all the time. I think if you think your ideas are good and you want to take a chance, you should take a chance without fear of professional repercussions, which is just very much not how the world works.
Right. And so to be clear, Salzman gets the designation. He doesn't have to run the primary. He told me had he not gotten the designation, he would have run the primary.
Well, so yeah, and so designation really is just like it's who the party is committed to help gather signatures for. Yeah. So
if I want to be really technical, Bill Maley, the supervisor, decided after that point, I didn't get the designation. I'm going to honor that designation, and I'm going to not run an active campaign.
Yeah.
Right. But what Salzman told me was he would have run a campaign if he didn't get the designation because he thinks that's healthy. But he did acknowledge that a lot of people in established politics tell him, hey, wait your turn. Like a lot of people don't think primaries are healthy.
Yeah, and they shouldn't. They should not think that. This is good. I think it is good for voters to have a choice. I honestly, I think it would have been great if Bill decided he wanted to take a chance at it, and like I think that is the way that you could best be like, hey, this is the person who Democratic voters in the town of Brighton would like to be their town supervisor. A really interesting case here is one of Mark's old colleagues in the Assembly, Bill Magnarelli, who just lost his primary to Mo Brown, who is about my age, give or take, was a county legislator in Onondaga. But, Bill Magnarelli was 77 years old. He got elected to the Assembly for the first time in 1999. That was the first time he faced a primary, was 3 weeks ago, and in these heavily slanted seats where, the general election is not very competitive.
Right.
That is like you are basically not facing any meaningful opposition for 25, 30 years.
That's right. So if you're in rural America and red areas, the primary is the election.
Yeah.
If you're in urban areas, the primary is the election. And then in a lot of places that are gerrymandered with districts, the primary is the election. Mark Johns, how do you feel about the idea of running primaries? Is there anything to be feared if you're the establishment? And do you think the establishments on all sides should be more welcoming of primary challengers?
I think especially in New York, we have a form of campaign finance reform here. And you're going to see, the district that I'm in, the 130th, which is Wayne County and Webster, it's at least somewhat a Republican district. So I expect that you're going to see Republican primaries every 2 years. The Democrats had a primary. But as I said earlier, we need term limits for a lot of reasons. You mentioned this gentleman, the young fellow from Syracuse that won. He was in the county ledge in Syracuse. Last year in November in Onondaga County, which is, Syracuse area, Onondaga County put term limits on the ballot. Okay? That was last November. It got 75% of the vote. None of those politicians got 75%. Everybody, it's like they tell you in sports, don't read your own press clippings. Oh, I'm very important. Oh, you can't get rid of me. Oh, I'm too good to be true. Well, guess what? We've seen people die in office. We've seen people get voted out. Things still go along. We're all complaining. When you say we got new people with young ideas and fresh ideas, name me one. The idea. Everybody comes up with platitudes. Well, I've heard all the ideas, and I agree with a lot of them. But you don't want the same established people in there forever. Look, if Vladimir Putin, an elected dictator, got rid of term limits, does that tell you something? Xi Jinping in China, an elected dictator, got rid of term limits.
I would like to gently challenge the idea that Putin, enacted democratic reforms.
He didn't.
Okay, good. Yeah, we're on the same page.
Yeah, he got rid of term limits.
I'm sorry. He got rid of term limits.
Yes, exactly.
He got rid of term limits, right.
And so did Xi Jinping in China. I mean, it used to be 2 5-year terms in China. Xi Jinping is, very full of himself, very important guy. China wouldn't exist without him. Well, maybe it would exist in a better way without him.
I see. So I see the point that you're making there. But when it comes to new ideas, you say you've heard the ideas. I'll give you an example. I got a text from a listener named Joel who said, Joe, who wants to talk about AI regulation. So he says, this is an example when you only have people who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s regulating. AI is so new and it's moving so fast. I'm not saying that your age dictates whether you get it. I'm 47. I don't get it. I don't want to regulate it myself. There is someone in the New York State Assembly named Alex Boris who's had a lot to say about this issue, just lost a narrow primary himself for Congress. But, Mark, is this an issue, Joe wants to know, where you do want younger voices helping craft policy?
Most of those younger voices are going to be the staffers. Like I said, there is no IQ test to get elected. It's all about money and name recognition and
So hold on.
elected.
I think what you're saying is policy comes from an elected leader, but that person has a staff.
Right.
And you may have younger people on your staff.
Not only that, but the general staff that does the whole Republican or Democrat side. There are some great staffers down in Albany, and I assume down in Washington, both parties. And they are the experts in different fields. And when you say, I'm going to write a bill, whatever the bill is, no one's writing their own bills. They go to bill drafting and have the bill written up.
But let me go back to what you said earlier this hour. No one goes into Wegmans and spends $100 and doesn't walk out with something. No one writes a check to a politician without an expectation, a big check, of something in return.
Right.
And if the longer you've been in office, the more you have been potentially campaign funded by the kinds of forces that are going to oppose regulation, especially with AI. And so you may have young staffers. You may have people who understand issues. But if you're the decision maker and you've been in office that long as the incumbent, are you not influenced by the past relationships that are telling you you can't regulate AI?
Oh, of course you're. Evan, obviously that's what you're being influenced by that. But if you know that, let's say you got a 6-year term pledge or 8-year, whatever it is, and you're in your final term, maybe you're going to have some guts to stand up to the big money and say, you know what? I don't think I'm going to play this game anymore. I'm term limited. I'm going to stand up for what's right instead of what's beneficial for my future. I'm going to worry about the constituents.
Patrick, you think that happens?
And I have tremendous respect for Mark. I could not disagree more. I think, that is the point where I think you are most prone to, being corrupted or, being prone to, want to, have somebody, take advantage of your vote because if you're term limited, you're going to need a job, especially if you're not 70 years old, there are people who if they could just run for re-election and continue doing the work they're doing now, I think that they would be, I think you're much less likely to risk, corruption if that is the case.
Yeah, well, Patrick, you're not exactly happy with the cast of characters we have now, so let's keep re-electing them and we can keep complaining about the same things.
I want to keep getting invited back on Connections just as much as you do, Mark.
Just for the record, we all love Evan Dawson.
Get out of here. All right. More feedback from listeners. I'll grab an email here from Charles. He says, we probably should have a younger Congress, but young people have horrible taste in music, and the decline of veterans in Congress in general likely means that if older member leaves, GWOT vets may not be able to make up the delta. Also, apparently, there's a lot of young people who are okay with communism, and I would hope that we can all agree that we should just ignore everything those, he says, morons have to say. So what Charles is saying there, I'm going to try to condense what I think Charles is saying. You can talk all you want about wanting to get younger, but if you get too young, Charles is basically saying 20-something activists are idealistic. But that idealism isn't going to craft smart or sensible policy. It's extreme. What do you think, Patrick?
Well, it's always much more difficult to govern than it is to campaign. And But if you are going into office with a majority, or like an ideological cadre that is big enough to pass policy, and affect it at scale, I think that does say something about like what voters want and the priorities, which is not to weigh in on the merits of any specific policy or ideology. But yeah, I think if you're one person in one seat, I don't think you have a mandate that is nearly, but if it is across the board, kind of like what we saw this year, I think there's 6 or 7 Democratic incumbents who have lost election in the House. It's the most in a generation. We almost had an incumbent senator lose their primary, which almost never, ever happens.
Do you think your party has moved in its younger cohort too far to the left?
I don't know if I disagree that a lot of the movement and satisfaction with ideology. I think that there are moderate members who are just as interested in fighting very hard. I think it is much more. Brad Lander has a great line about this, where he's like the divide in the Democratic Party isn't about capitalism versus socialism. It's about fighters versus folders. And, I think that is what it is. I think it is like there is a base that wants to see a party that is much more vocal about their values and prepared to fight for what they believe is right versus, kind of people who are just perpetually, existing in Bill Clinton's second term of just, like we've got to compromise and, sit down to come up with a nice bipartisan solution that, like, I think many people, base Democratic voters just that's not the political message they want to hear at this point in time.
Andrew and Irondequoit on the phone. Hang there for 1 second. I got to give Mark his last word because Mark is then off to a news conference about what's happening, by the way. Do you want to break any news?
Yeah, we're doing a news conference for tax cuts, property tax reduction for veterans, disabled veterans. And so
bipartisan work on that, I think?
Yeah, it is. Myself, Adam Bello, I think almost everybody's on board. But just to reference
so final thoughts from you. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, to reference the last caller, he said that, young people have bad taste in music. He probably
he's right about that, but go ahead.
Well,
how did your parents feel about your taste in music, Evan?
They hated it.
Yeah.
I'm with Patrick. I like the younger stuff. But I'll tell you what. There was an old band called The Who. I don't know if you guys remember them, but they had a song say, "Won't Get Fooled Again." Yeah. Remember that song?
Of course.
The last 2 lines in the song are, "Meet the old boss, same as the new," or "Meet the new boss, same as the old boss."
Yeah.
If you don't take the big money out of politics, all they care about is getting reelected. In the New York State legislature, $142,000 a year for part-time work. They're done the first week in June. Multi-million-dollar pensions, health care for life, per diems over $200 a day.
You had that one of those state jobs. You weren't actually working part-time, were you? Just because the session ended.
I probably am busier than most people. I'm out there. But the reality is, yes, you have some people in your office. If they are that valuable, and by the way, there's a bill in now to raise their pay to $180. Of course, they always do that every 4 years. Around Christmas time, they're very generous with the gifts. But we got to realize that they are in there for what's best for them and not always what's best for the constituents. So whether they are young career politicians or older ones, we got to break the cycle of the big money controlling everything. And I'm saying that as a Republican.
Hey, thank you for making time for the program today.
Thanks, Evan.
It's always nice to see Mark Johns. He's a former state assemblyman. He's a member of the Monroe County Legislature. He's off to an event with them. We're coming right back with Patrick Coyle, Chief of Staff of the Rochester-Genesee Valley Area Labor Federation. And Andrew, on the phone, I got a pile of your emails, plenty of feedback. They'll yell at Patrick now that Mark's leaving. We'll do that next.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Mary Cariola Center, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson, believing an informed and engaged community is a connected one. MaryCariola.org.
In today's media environment, you have a lot of power. You can make a direct impact on your community by powering this public radio station with your monthly sustaining membership. Right now, what matters the most is your participation. Please start or increase your monthly donation.
This is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. You don't think young music is bad?
I have notoriously bad taste in music, and so I just think there's always this idea, right? Like
you're in your 30s now. You can look at the teens and think, "What are you doing?" Like it's a rite of passage.
I really try hard not to, right? Because you can go back, you can find it, historical artifacts from the Roman Empire, where it's like these people who were born 20 years after me are going to ruin the world. It's truly the oldest societal impulse, and so I try. And I know I'm getting old. You don't want to hear my opinions about basketball and how threes are ruining the game.
They are. We have no mid-range left.
They are. All these young kids don't just want to dribble around, Evan.
See?
But, I'm trying very hard, specifically about, music and cultural stuff, to not lapse into old guy tendencies.
All right, that's fair enough. All right, Andrew in Irondequoit on the phone. Hey, Andrew, go ahead.
Yeah, of course the issue is, the reason we're talking about all these things come back to the affordability crisis, which is housing. And if you guys would, look at Mamdani, he's building a grocery store. It's costing like 5 times as much as it should, according to the grocers associations. Socialists don't know how to build houses. What you need is like plain little houses like they used to build. I mean, you go up by Culver and Norton, there's all these cool, dumb little houses up there. It wouldn't be, if you guys would just get out of the way and let people build lots of dumb houses for dumb people, dumb meaning plain, you could get a lot of this frustration out. My mortgage payment is $285 a month. That's crazy. But I only bought it. I bought it 27 years ago, and it's a beautiful little house. I don't understand why you can't get back to that. If you guys would just let carpenters build houses instead of having meetings and talking about taxing the rich, that's not going to help you build a house. What you need is a wide open, here's your permit, go build me 40 houses or 100 houses that are creative and small and cheap.
But Andrew,
this is not rocket science. Okay?
But just help me understand something here. Like I'm listening, and Patrick, I'm sure will have something to say. But I want to make sure you are like listening to today's show about the age of representation, and I want to make sure I understand the connection here.
The connection is people are frustrated with the old politicians and their old stuff, which is not helping them get a cheap house, which is going to have them have a nice life. People are getting killed by rent. That's why they're miserable, and they're looking at who is in charge. Well, all these old guys are. Well, let's get a new guy in there. So they come with their Marxist ideas. It's going to fall flat on its face.
I see. So you're saying if you turn too far to the left on the young side for the ideas, you're not going to get the solution that you want.
No, it's not going to work because they're not really, I don't know what they're up to, but they certainly are not about free market capitalism, which is what's going to get you cheap houses. If you would just get out of the way and stop talking and give me some 2x4s and we'll build you some beautiful little houses.
All right, so Andrew is an abundance Democrat. I don't know that he's a Democrat.
No, I'm not an abundance guy.
Okay, you're not an abundance guy.
Because those guys want to move the wrong people into the wrong neighborhoods, as far as I can tell.
All right, now let me just jump in here, and let's stay to the previous portion of the call, Patrick Coyle. And what do you make of? First of all, he's saying people are getting crushed by rent and mortgages. Yes, of course they are.
Yeah, and I think that's what I said at the top of the hour pretty much, which is, people feel like they cannot afford their lives. The American dream is inaccessible for, generations that are coming of age now in a way that it was not 20, 30 years ago. I think about this through the lens of my in-laws, right? Where, my father-in-law was a CO at Elmira Prison, and, my mother-in-law was a stay-at-home mom, and they were able to buy a house, free and clear on, one salary of a CO, and this was probably 93, 94, in a way that it just absolutely would not be possible now. If it was a couple in the same situation looking for a similar size house, they wouldn't even get qualified for a mortgage, let alone be able to find something.
But listen to Andrew's point before that last point that made me kind of pass out a little bit, and I just blacked out, and we're back. And anyway, he is saying that while everyone agrees that rent and mortgage are the problem, that housing is a problem, that he doesn't think this push to the left in a younger generation is going to solve it.
I think the housing crisis in America is so big that there's not one thing that could solve it, right? If there was, we would just all be doing it. I think it is a
he says it's free market capitalism.
And he's allowed to think that. I support him. But it is it is too complexly boiled down to this. Like, if we just fix this one specific thing, yeah. But I do think that many of the it is broadly too difficult to build homes. And I think if people, I do think that much of the dissatisfaction with the political situation would be lessened if people did feel like it was realistic for them to, buy a house, working an honest job.
Are you an abundance Democrat?
Next question.
No. Okay. That is a whole other conversation. I'm very, very curious to have it. All right. Mark emails to say, this is not Mark Johns. This is Mark on email.
Mark's
says,
back.
No. Mark says, Evan, I agree there should be term limits in our government, which has nothing to do with age, but more to do with giving others the opportunity to serve. As far as age is concerned and people in these positions and other positions, I think it's more about their job becoming their identity. I have several friends who have retired and had no idea what to do next. Their jobs became a big part of their identity, and without work, they were lost. So that's two separate points, but interesting. What do you think, Patrick?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more, where I think that is... Jerry Nadler retiring, which was the primary you referenced with Alex Boresh, and he was very open about it. He was like, look, I just don't, I think it is time for, another generation to have a shot at this, and to see what kind of ideas they can come up with. But yeah, I think that is a lot of what we see of these people not wanting to give their seats up is just to they like the status, they like the celebrity, and they kind of struggle to be like, well, what would I do, if I were not, in the state assembly or in Congress or United States senator.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a range for people. I mean, I've talked about my dad and his lack of identity when he retired and how he has struggled in retirement. I see that point from Mark. I do think identity is a big part of it, but I also think it's just the connection to power and influence. Yeah.
My dad loves being retired. I hear so much about pickleball in Annapolis, Maryland.
I would love it if my father, my goodness gracious.
Man, he's I hear a lot about his pickleball game, which I'm always happy to. He seems thrilled. But yeah, no, I also don't. I think I would struggle tremendously with retirement. But
listener and viewer on YouTube is saying, it says, Evan, your critical lens makes you a better shot at providing oversight. I think that's in regards to my comments about AI. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that someone at 57 or 67 can't provide oversight to AI. I am saying that there are certain issues that I do not just want one age cohort in charge of.
Yeah, the AI, those are the two big things I want to talk about, in the lens of this conversation were student loans and AI, because I think both of them are so illustrative, just like the way the world is changing. Chuck Grassley was born in, 1933?
1933.
Yeah, and he is the guy, he's the guy who will probably have a big role in drafting much of the legislation, that comes of this, right? When you think about committees. And yeah, do we trust who is not even a boomer, but like an older member of the silent generation, might even predate the silent generation, to be the person who's like, I understand, the cutting edge of technology in this country.
Chuck Grassley's grandfather was alive in the Civil War, and he is crafting major policy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see a world in which that does not sit well with many people.
Well, on tech. And again, there's a danger to starting to sound ageist with this. And I don't want to sound ageist. I struggle with this because Patrick made the point about music, but I actually think about this in this context a lot. The older we get, the more tempting it is to the kids these days, right? I mean, it's so tempting to do that. In a lot of ways, that should be resisted. Now, one of the things I think is valuable to know is that there are plenty of opinions that you hold today that you may not hold in 5 or 10 or 30 years. I do not believe all of the same things at 47 that I did at 37 or 27 or 17. And that's valuable to me. That comes with what I think is the accumulation of an idea about the world and wisdom. So I do think it's valuable to think that as we get older, the way we see the world will change, hopefully for the wiser, for the better. But that doesn't mean, again, that somebody in their 20s or in their early 30s, or John Ossoff is 39, he could be the next president. So I think this cuts both ways. Yeah. And I don't want to host a conversation that just implies that age equals bad. It's not.
No, and I absolutely not say that either, right? There are senators who are in their 80s who are very clearly still spry, and able to, clearly be engaged with policy. I think Bernie's a fantastic example of this. But also, There are equally as many senators who are over 80 and under 50.
There's an equal number?
It's 8 of both.
8 senators under the age of 50, 8 over the age of 80.
Yes.
That is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and what does that say about, the priorities, the way they view the world, and how in step it is with their the respective constituents? I think it is fair to have questions about that. And yeah, I hope that nobody's, hearing what I'm saying is just like, we shouldn't have, people of a certain age in office anymore. That would never be what I would want to say. I think
you don't want to see an age like litmus,
no, of course
70,
not. It'd be
80 for the presidency, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be anti-democratic in 15 different ways. But, I
agree
think
with that.
It should be fairer. It should be easier to question your elected officials and to say, like, is this the best guy for the job still?
Right.
In a way that I think often it has not been for the last 20-ish years.
Let me get Jeremy in Rochester on the phone. Hey, Jeremy, go ahead.
Hi, Evan. You and I are probably about the same age. I've been politically active for maybe 20 or 25 years, voted for different parties. It is the same as it ever was. And there's a line from the movie War Games, and I'll clean it up. The general says, I would whiz on a spark plug if I thought it'd do any good. It's time for new ideas, because the old ideas aren't working. Doesn't matter what party. That's all I got. Have a good day.
Jeremy, thank you. Patrick, you just gave a thumbs up to that, yeah?
Well, yeah, I think that's sentiments like that are becoming much more popular. And I think that the reason we're having this conversation, right, where, this is a topic of discourse in a way that, it just like has not been. And I think part of that is Congress getting, both older statistically and also visibly older, right, where you've had like, whether it's McConnell or Feinstein or, some of the other ones where, I think they're, you're like, well, we worry this person is losing a step, but yeah, it is. And also people's just general dissatisfaction with the political environment. I think people are ready for change.
The Daily Show, we didn't fact check this. They claimed last night that six members of Congress have died in office in the last term.
That's true.
And that is true. Okay. That's remarkable.
Yeah, I think it's 4 or 5 House Dems and then Lindsey Graham, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. Off air from a listener, I dearly wish we had an advisory senior statesperson type role for these elders. Their wisdom has value, but their overwhelming and long-standing presence blocks the introduction of newer ideas. Not even getting into the power of the two parties and super PACs, recently strengthened by SCOTUS, gerrymandering, and abysmal voter turnout. So this person is saying, yeah, be an elder statesperson. Add your voice, but don't hog the stage or the policy making. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I think she speaks to what much of this is about, which is, I think if people thought the country was headed in a great direction, and if people thought, they liked their government representatives, and if people thought, the world was the world that they wanted to see, I don't think we'd be having this conversation, right? I think this is kind of downstream of how frustrated and how upset people feel with the world and, the political environment and their economic prospects.
Couple comments from YouTube. One says, when Schumer was born, Taft was president. I don't think so. Yeah, now you're challenging my presidential timelines. But Chuck Schumer is not a young person. And that's, again, that's not a criticism of Chuck Schumer. He has been around.
He's been around.
He has been around. It was Truman was president, not Taft, but okay. And maybe that was just a snarky comment. Maybe that was like saying Lincoln was president when Schumer was.
I would be curious to know who was president when Grassley was born. Coolidge?
1933. That sounds correct.
No, it's maybe FDR.
No, I think that is FDR by then. FDR because he had the 12 years, right? Hoover until March of that year, and then it was FDR. You got it on the second.
I have a marketing degree. It's I can't be expected to know all this.
Another comment on YouTube. I'm still thinking about the caller Andrew saying his mortgage is $285 a month.
Thank God the video was not on me. I think my jaw dropped for a good 30 seconds.
But Andrew said he bought his house 27 years ago, and it was a different time. And in the last decade, the explosion on this has really, really buried a lot of people. Andrew is not wrong to say rent and mortgage is a singular issue in this country that needs solving.
Yeah. But again, if you're a person who's in these offices and your mortgage payment is $285, do you understand that?
Well,
right?
No, that's an interesting point, because probably most of the people who are in elected office do not have these stratospheric.
And if they did have a mortgage, it was likely around that idea, right? Where this, conceptually, I imagine it would be difficult to get them to understand that your mortgage payment and your student loan payment could be 50% of your take-home income if you're, and that's as a person with like a good job.
American senators are also rich, and if you've
that's the other thing, right?
Yeah, if you've got a big mortgage, they can absorb it.
It's already dealing from the small population. We're like, well, I don't have a mortgage because my dad just bought me a house with his car dealership money,
So I'll give you the last 30 seconds. You didn't agree with Mark Johns earlier this hour on term limits. So what's something that you would like to see happen that you would think make for a healthier system?
I think Congress getting a lot of its power back, right, and functioning as a true co-equal branch of government, and doing anything other than kind of serving as a cheerleader or opposition force for the president would go a long way to help people. I do think that higher congressional staff budgets, more empowered committees could go a long way towards making people feel, like their viewpoint is represented, even if they're not a fan of whoever the current president is, and that, like, they have a voice for them, right? Because I think that's much of it is like, in the last 20 years, Congress has pretty much ceded all of its roles to do anything other than like pass one reconciliation bill a year. But
I actually think that's really interesting, and that's a conversation for another day, because there's a lot of talk about the executive lurch toward more power or the accumulation, but that has not been able to happen without Congress willingly ceding it.
Yeah.
Willingly ceding it.
Yeah, and for a variety of different incentives. But yeah, I think it is inseparable from people's dissatisfaction with the world around us.
Our thanks to Mark Johns, who joined us earlier this hour, Patrick Coyle, Chief of Staff of the Rochester-Genesee Valley Area Labor Federation. Thanks for being here.
Oh, it's always a treat, Evan. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. More connections coming up.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.